As I said earlier, we've been having trouble with the stream and the audio dropping off. It looks like it's working now. There's a few folks that are listening, and if I notice that the audio drops off, I'm going to try to fix it, and if I can't fix it, I'll start a new stream. So you'll see that come up. Sorry for the interruption here. Hopefully this will get this fixed, but ever since the recent update to Chrome, it hasn't been working well. Today's sutta kind of concludes this recent, we've had 5 or 6 classes on the restraint at the 6th sense base, and the importance of that in developing the Dhamma and regaining control of our mind. And this sutta is the Buddha teaching restraint to Anathapindika. And those of you might remember that many of the suttas are prefaced by the Buddha being at Jita's Grove in Savatthi at Anathapindika's monastery. Anathapindika was a very wealthy businessman who came across the Buddha and his Dhamma, took to his Dhamma and awakened, but continued his life as a businessman, engaged in commerce, but now disentangled from the world. And that's an important teaching in itself. Just because we are intent on developing the Dhamma, and we do develop the Dhamma, doesn't mean that we have to completely leave the world behind. We're simply just no longer entangled with the world. We're not taking things personally. This sutta also points to a very important, and I would say fundamental aspect of the Dhamma, of using meditation as the Buddha taught for the sole purpose of deepening concentration. And so many people that I talk to come to meditation or come to this practice, a mindfulness practice, because they feel that they have this thing. It's often characterized as monkey mind. Their minds are always going, you're always churning information within your head, and you don't seem to be able to control it. And I bet just about everyone here feels that way or has felt that way at one time. And that's from a mind rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths that is constantly stuck in the need to objectify everything, every thought, word, and idea that occurs, every event, and take it in a personal way and identify the self with that event. And so the end result of that, from that lack of restraint, is that every thought is then a self-referential thought, which means there's always a constant, often very subtle, level of stress associated with our own thoughts, whether we realize it or not. And so that's why at the end of the day, we feel like we're just spent, because we haven't stopped thinking for a moment. We've literally lost control of our minds in that way. And so in this sutta, it's a very short sutta, the Buddha recognizes that Anathapindika has developed the Dhamma to a very high level, but there's still some subtle tweaking that needs to be done to the way that he's seeing himself in relation to the world. So let me get to the sutta. On one occasion, Anathapindika went to the Buddha, bowed with respect for his teacher, and sat to one side. The Buddha, just checking to see if the sound was on, sorry. The Buddha, acknowledging his benefactor, instructed him further in the Dhamma. When unrestrained, the mind has no protection. From a mind lacking protection, it follows that the body is unprotected, and so verbal and mental actions are also unprotected. This is an uncontrollable and disappointing abode. Just having this mind within a body, it's a disappointing and uncomfortable abode. Now the Buddha uses the metaphor of a poorly constructed roof, an unprotected house, to show the importance of developing protection. This idea of restraint or protecting our mind is contrary to what a mind rooted in self-referential views wants to hear, doesn't it? It doesn't want to have any restrictions placed on itself, because it's always grasping at establishing or defending what it's already created about itself. Is that clear? These are fabrications. This is what the Buddha talks about, and what I often refer to as fabrications. Because we've created constructs in our minds that what I need to be happy, or what I need to get to be happy, or acquire to be happy, or safe, or fulfilled, or what I need to avoid to continue to be safe, happy, and fulfilled, are all self-referential views rooted in ignorance of the way things truly are, and a lack of understanding of the three marks of existence, of the impermanent nature of all things, the not self-characteristic, meaning the views that I'm using to describe a self to myself and to the world around me are wrong views. Buddha used that term anatta to just remind us those views are wrong views, let go of the views. And because of a misunderstanding of those first two, we create stress in our lives, dukkha occurs. And so if it is ultimately the way that we think about ourselves in relation to the world around us that is the problem, the solution is gaining control of that process, isn't it? And that's exactly why we practice restraint at the sixth sense base. Is that clear? Because it's such a fundamental aspect of the Dhamma, and it's a fundamental aversion that a self-referential ego self has. It doesn't want to hear anything about restraint. Nothing. It needs to be free, and that's that whole notion of that the world is here for me to take and to get as much as I need. The end result of that is suffering, isn't it? And we can think of many, many people that have created great wealth and acquired great positions of power, and yet have no peace of mind at all. And it's not just wealthy people. I mean, this occurs to all of us. Until we understand the true nature of the three marks of existence, no matter what our station in life or financial condition, we'll always be grasping. Well, and once we decide what we need to be happy, we'll always be clinging to those views, which are wrong views rooted in ignorance of Four Noble Truths. So the metaphor of an unprotected house relates directly to an unprotected mind lacking restraint. Here's the metaphor. Just as when a house is poorly roofed, the house is unprotected. The beams, the walls, the floors all become soggy. This house is an uncomfortable and disappointing abode, much like a mind that's unprotected, lacking restraint. In the same manner, from an unrestrained mind lacking protection, one's bodily, verbal, and mental actions get soggy, I love the relationship, and become an uncomfortable and disappointing abode. How often have we all been disappointed in just the way we're thinking? And that we find that it is our thinking that is hurting us, at least at times. We're able to recognize that. It's because we're lacking control of our thinking, no, isn't it? That we're thinking thoughts that we don't want to think, even though we're thinking it. That's the essence of a conditioned mind. We've literally lost control of our thinking, or lost control of our minds. In the sutta that we talked about, I can't remember if it was last Saturday or last Tuesday, the Vitakka Santana Sutta, where the Buddha teaches the importance of gaining the ability to think what we want to think when we want to think it. It's the essence of the Dhamma too, isn't it? And it's the essence of a mind that is free of conflict. To think what is appropriate to what's occurring, no matter what is occurring. And none of those thoughts are hurtful towards ourselves or others in any way, and the resulting actions. This is where the Buddha is talking about bodily, verbal, and mental actions. And ultimately, it's those mental actions, our thought processes, that is reflected outwardly towards others and inwardly towards ourselves. The meaning of that is that the ultimate stress and suffering that we cause is not from outside events or outside people or outside circumstances, because of the way we think. And so the Buddha teaches this radical but entirely practical way of gaining control of our thinking by recognizing where we need to practice restraint. The Buddha continues, mindfulness has no lodging, and the opportunity for an auspicious life is lost. In the Bhattacharya Sutta, we'll be teaching that on Tuesday. The Buddha teaches that an auspicious day, is a day when we're able to practice refined mindfulness and develop the Dhamma. And so that sutta, but we should look at it this way. Any day is an auspicious day in our life if we're able to remember that we have an eightfold path as a framework for our life. To ultimately gain complete control of our thinking, think what we want to think, when we want to think it, and whatever is appropriate to the situation, and live with a mind that is continually free of conflict. And that's not some magical pipe dream. And it's not something that we gain by doing certain things that prove that we're good and worthy of a mind free of conflict. That's a religious application, isn't it? Or sometimes a mystical spiritual application. All that we need to do to develop a calm and peaceful mind is take to the Dhamma. That's what the Buddha is instructing Anathapindika now. Remember, he's developed a Dhamma practice, but there's still some restraint lacking in him. And the Buddha is giving him this refined teaching. So now the Buddha continues. Friend, just as when a house is properly roofed, the house is protected. The beams, the walls, the floors won't rot. This house is now a comfortable and content abiding. When restrained, the mind is protected. When the mind is protected, bodily, verbal, and mental actions are also protected. A comfortable and content abiding is present. Refined mindfulness is well established, and the opportunity for an auspicious life is now present. That's the end of the sutta. Thank you for listening. Isn't that a remarkable and wonderful sutta? And its simplicity and its directness. Of course, like all the Buddha's teachings, it can't be taken out of context. The Buddha didn't just say, all you have to do is just restrain your mind and you're good to go, and went on his way. Because he knew that would be cruel, wouldn't it? Because we would all wonder, well, why can't I restrain my mind? This awakened man said, okay, restrain your mind. Because we're lacking the framework of the Eightfold Path and an understanding of the nature of ignorance of Four Noble Truths as to why we can't restrain our minds. So as we engage in the Eightfold Path, rooted in the concentration that's developed in Shamatha-Vipassana meditation, that then supports the refined mindfulness to integrate the entire Eightfold Path. That's all the Buddha ever taught. But it's enough, isn't it? Because it takes us to the point where our minds are free of conflict, where our minds are free of self-referential views and self-identifying with life as life occurs. In other words, taking life personally. We do it ourselves. It's a completely inside job. The great thing about that, when I had this realization, remember my story with Buddhism, modern Buddhism, I spent many, many years studying all the different traditions and taking vows that at the time I took seriously, and studying with literally some of the most well-recognized teachers of our time, becoming increasingly frustrated, first with myself, because I felt like there must be something terribly wrong with me, which is often how it's presented, because I can't get this. But the truth of the matter was I was never presented anything that was possible for me to get, to understand and actually implement in my life. It was presented more as an endurance test, that as long as I could endure this certain practice and do these certain rituals, at some point, and it was usually presented this way, probably many eons in the future, suddenly I would just instantaneously awaken. And I followed that path. And it was hurtful. It was painful. But I always took it personally. In other words, I blamed myself. And it wasn't until I came across what an awakened human being actually taught that I realized I am in complete control of what and how I think. And at the time, I had no control of my thinking, but I understood that if I developed this, I could develop concentration and develop a way of living with refined mindfulness in the world that allowed me to remain free of conflict no matter what was occurring in the world. Just to go on a little bit more. Since the beginning of recorded human history, those recordings are mostly based on recounting the conflict that's within the world over and over and over again. Those are the great historical events. And mixed in between that are great philosophical events and great scientific/technological events that pop up within that historical dialogue. But most of history relates to what conflict is occurring in the world. And in all this time, we've never been able to diminish conflict at all, have we? Whether it's outside or within us. And we keep coming up with theories of how we can do it. And we keep coming up with, in our country, we put people in positions of power that can hopefully protect us. And in the world, we hope we come up with systems that will somehow end conflict. But the problem of internal conflict is never addressed. The Buddha had the same concern when he set out seeking understanding. Why is there so much conflict in the world? Another word for conflict would be dukkha. And he thought if he looked hard enough and studied long enough, that he would be able to figure out where this all is all coming from. And he did. The Nagara Sutta describes his final understanding of why there's so much conflict in the world. It was because it was within his own mind, and that was the only place that he could change conflict. And upon his awakening, he realized that that was the common human problem. It wasn't because we are inherently competitive or aggressive people. It was because we are inherently ignorant of the way things are truly are in human life. The first noble truth, dukkha, occurs. That's a completely impersonal declaration. And then the Buddha teaches dukkha occurs, suffering occurs within us and without us, outside of us, because of craving for things, acquisitions, and clinging to those things. All of that is rooted in wrong views of who we are in relation to the world, isn't it? Anatta. The Buddha then declared that it's possible to end this process of internal conflict, and it is the Eightfold Path that is a path to end all internal conflict. The Buddha never thought that he would be thought of himself as a savior. He didn't teach a salvific religion. He simply taught a way that individuals could end conflict in their own mind, with the understanding that if enough people would do this, it would end conflict in the world. But he also knew that that was an unrealistic statement or goal to set out to people, because it would distract from the need for individual awakening. Because if he said his goal was, we all need to awaken so that we can end all the suffering in the world, that the focus would be on that. That's the bodhisattva vow that is very common in modern Buddhism. The Buddha always talked about himself prior to his awakening as an unawakened bodhisattva, meaning a human being that is imbued with this great compassion for all others, but lacking the understanding of the conflict within his own mind, and so is not capable of ending conflict in the world. So you hear me say this often: the most loving thing I can do for myself and for all other sentient beings, if I truly care about the conditions in the world and the conditions of other people's minds, I'll take to the Dhamma and heal the conflict in my own mind. And that's what the Buddha taught for 45 years. There's a sutta that I'll be teaching maybe next week or in a couple of weeks that gets into the ever deepening levels of jhana, meditative absorption. But in relation to, as we deepen our understanding, deepen our concentration and our understanding of ourselves, we are then able to see it in other people and understand it. That's a place of true power, isn't it? Because when we can understand the suffering of others and the suffering of the world like a Buddha did, through understanding our own suffering, we'll no longer create any more conflict because we understand where it's coming from. We won't blame people or blame institutions, blame governments, because we understand where it's coming from. And we'll be able to engage in the world in peaceful rhetoric because our minds are at peace. That's and I think I gave 2 or 3 talks today, but I promise that's the last one. And again, just to emphasize the importance of restraint. Any questions or comments directly on the sutta, and then we'll go around the room. And I want to check. Yeah, the voice is still working. Great. Lorna, how are you today? Good to see you.
Yeah, I first read this sutta when I was at home, and it instantly hit me that just how much protection we do have in the Buddha's teachings.
Yeah.
Learning the Buddha's teaching, how much protection in our minds that we do have, which is a wonderful thing. Period. We're now sort of more and more aware of, I think, of how much unhappiness and mental anguish that people are living with. Yeah, just daily, hourly, you know. And just carrying these Buddha teachings in your mind really can make a big difference at the crucial time. If you come across a difficult time in your life, you can always sort of take it back to what the Buddha taught and see that you're taking life personally and just going through the checklist that we have. And it really is very, very helpful. And it put it in a nutshell, it means that you have less stress in your life. You can see life more clearly, you can understand it, and you live life with less stress. Having said that, I have been thinking about one question this week, which I can't find the answer to. We're a bit, like you say, we've been looking at not believing your own thoughts, and for the last few weeks, and I know that our bodies, for instance, are not really part of us. They just kind of come along with the ride, or we go along with the ride with the body, or whatever. It's not really part of yourself, as in that sense. And knowing when you meet a stranger that no matter what they think of themselves, they aren't always who they think they are, because they're wrapped up in their own ideals of who they think they are, and we know that's impermanent. And so it just leaves the question as, when you meet a stranger, exactly what are you looking for? If you the body has nothing to do with the person. Who they think they are is nothing to do with who they are. It just leaves the question of, what am I looking for? And I can't find the answer to that.
What a great question.
And
I don't know.
Just and also, you can take, knowing that everything is impermanent in life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're all kind of strangers. Every time I see you, you're a little bit tweaked, a little bit different, and this, that, and the other. Everybody's a little bit different every day, or every hour, or every minute, or every moment.
Yep.
It's you can't. There's questions that the teachings question you on that are difficult to pin down and understand, or just it's just leaving it open, therefore it's flexible. Is that the answer?
Yes. It's a very, very profound question. And it shows a deep level of understanding of the Dhamma to even propose the question. So a few things you touched on. Our bodies aren't insignificant, but they're not to be taken personal, meaning we shouldn't self-identify. Shouldn't. It's a wrong view to self-identify as this body and take it personal.
Right.
On the other hand, it's important to understand that we are a mind united with a body, and to protect, just like we protect our mind, to protect that body by good food and proper shelter, etc. The reason why I say that is that there's still ascetic practices that were common during the Buddhist times, still practiced today, of complete self-denial. And you see people walking around emaciated, usually without clothes, thinking that that's some kind of spiritual practice. If you deny the body, you'll free the mind. The Buddha did that. That's ignoble, painful. The way to see other people is the way to see is just as we see ourselves, always in a process of becoming, like you described. I'm a little tweaked every time you see me. We all are. We all are different in some way, even if it's just on the physical level. Our bodies are constantly sloughing off cells and building new cells, just on that practical way. But also that we are, if we're evolving within the Dhamma, our mindfulness is always evolving too. So we're different in that way. One of the ways that we try not to differ too much, and this usually happens by the time we're in our mid-teens to early 20s, is we've decided who we are. We've created views about who we are in relation to the world. And we don't want to change those views at all. And it becomes very difficult to hold on to those views as we go through life. But most of us don't want to change our basic views about who we are in relation to the world. I'm getting a little bit away from your question. When Vajragota would ask the Buddha, how do you describe yourself now and how do you describe yourself later, meaning after death? And the Buddha said, he would either sit there, in some of the suttas, the Buddha would just sit quietly, inferring or trying to teach that the question itself just doesn't even deserve an answer. But then he would often say, it is your question that's confusing you. Let go of the question. It's irrelevant to the Dhamma about who is it that I'm interacting with at the moment, because you're trying to put a limiting view on what that person is, rather than understand that what defines me is what I'm holding in mind in this present moment. And if that mind is well framed by reality, by the Eightfold Path, then I'm free of self-referential views. And if I can afford that to myself, I should be giving it to other people. In other words, when someone is acting in a way that is outside the framework of the Eightfold Path, they might be arrogant or angry. They might be constantly self-aggrandizing without realizing it. Most people do that to a certain extent anyway. I don't have to take offense or be offended by it, because I understand why this person is presenting themselves in that way. But I also understand at the root of every human individual is the opportunity to awaken. Stop right there. And because then the next thought could be, if I'm not well grounded in the Eightfold Path, well, it's my job to save that person. No, it's not. If that person is interested, and this is exactly how people came to the Buddha during his lifetime. If people are interested in the way that you're carrying yourself, you seem so peaceful, you seem so calm, you seem so happy, you seem so at ease. Why? There's your opportunity. But the opportunity isn't there just because you see suffering, because that just creates more suffering, more conflict in other people. The Buddha never stood on a street corner, with a bell. He carried himself in a way as an example to other people that may be interested. And his teachings are still here today. So I guess the answer to your question is, through understanding yourself, you can understand other people. And by the way you carry yourself, you may have the opportunity to be helpful towards other people if they're interested. Does that answer your question? Was it more basic? How do I interact in the world?
No, it wasn't like that. It was just the understanding of what people are, really what people are, and they've evolved through their life as they have evolved, and that kind of shows through in the character and all this sort of stuff. And,
yep.
I mean, I understand that, but if that's not anything you can really hold your thought accountable to somebody of that nature of person, because it's impermanent and it's just who they think they are at the moment, not necessarily on a permanent sense. It's So you just beg the question, well, how do you understand, and what are you looking for when you meet someone? It kind of like not, in a way, the Buddha teachings kind of like knock your legs from under you when you meet somebody the first time. I'm just saying for the first time, just for an instance.
Yeah.
I mean, the first time I've met you for the first time today is another first time. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? But when you meet somebody for the first time, if you look at really how people have evolved, like I said, that like knocks your feet away from you to understand something, to seek to come to know, really know people. And am I making sense?
Yes, I just don't want to interrupt you. You kind of answered your question. You're trying to establish some type of permanence
I can see
where it can't be established. You're getting to the root of it. The Buddha would say that what you're trying to create permanence is just like it's foam on the water. These self-referential views, you're seeing that in another person. They're like foam on. There's nothing substantial there. Why? And it doesn't mean that you have a human being standing in front of you. That's real. That's not unreal. We're not seeing it. The Buddha would say that because of our wrong views, what we're seeing in the world around us is like an illusion. But that's an important distinction between it is an illusion. And so another great misunderstanding because of the inability to answer that specific question has led to the belief that there's nothing really exists and we're living in this grand void. That's a modern application of Buddhism because they don't understand the underlying reality that it's not that there's nothing here. It's simply that there's nothing permanent here. And because a mind rooted in ignorance insists on permanence, it insists on being able to objectify and solidify something, whatever it is that it's attaching itself to. It cannot comprehend the constant process of impermanence. And because it doesn't understand impermanence, the first mark of existence, because of wrong views of its own self, the second mark of existence, it creates stress and suffering, the third mark of existence. Does everybody see that? That is the singular insight that is to be gained through the Buddha's teachings. Again, I'm saying that because there's this modern insight movement that is we should look into insight into everything, and it's very specific insight, and you're getting at the heart of it. How do I see what's occurring around me if everything is impermanent? It seems like by looking at it that way, it cuts the legs off. Well, cut the legs off. Because it's the legs that are trying to ground something or our views in permanence. And what happens when that occurs? No matter what is being presented to us, no matter how a person is presenting themselves to us, because we understand suffering, there's no conflict created. And no matter what is being presented from the outside, from another person, we understand that dukkha occurs, relates to other people as well. And if they are unfortunate enough to not have developed the Dhamma, the only way to see that is to recognize how fortunate we are to have found it and end conflict in our minds. And imagine if there were enough people in the world today that could actually see other people that are driven by conflict. Again, I'm talking a lot about the political climate in our country today, and I'm not talking about one person. I'm talking about both sides because they're so conflicted. Because they're not seeing people clearly.
It does seem insincere in a way that when you meet someone or in your relationship with someone, you don't ground it in some way. It kind of seems insincere to, for instance, the relationship I have with you, if I was to hold in mind all that we've talked about, that you're constantly evolving and one thing, it kind of like seems insincere to see people that way.
I can see where you're coming from, but the root of a sincere person relates to their authenticity to what they believe, right? I mean, that's a clear definition of being sincere. And so understanding the Dhamma as we do, the most sincere way we can interact with other people is from a point of view of wisdom. I know it seems like, well, we're not able to really meet people at their level. I think that's kind of what the underlying tension might be there. But this is just a matter of you coming to a familiar comfortability with your level of understanding, because it's a self-referential ego self that would want to try to fix something that we see out in the world, or interact with what's being presented on a certain level, meaning their level, meaning a level that is still rooted in some level of conflict. And unless we address it at that level, we're not being sincere as being present with them. But the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and all other sentient beings is to awaken and present that to other people. And so oftentimes, I mean, this is the example of the Buddha, when this would happen to him, exactly the situation is just that. Oftentimes, he would just sit there peacefully to show that he does not want to engage in conflict. And when it was appropriate to respond mindfully, he would. And it was usually when a particular direct question was put to him. So while it may seem from a societal point of view that we should engage in conflicting discourse just because it's what's occurring, all that is furthering is conflict, isn't it? And again, now we can take this to an extreme. When we meet a stranger on the road, when I meet a stranger on the road and something occurs that gets us talking to each other, you know, I want to know how they're doing today, and what's your life about? Just, that's fine. And hopefully by that mundane interaction, they may see something in me that they're looking for. Hopefully I'm presenting myself in a calm and peaceful and mindful way. And this does happen occasionally. I'm not saying that every person I talk to, every stranger, I mean, they're not here today. But it does happen occasionally that people say, wow, you seem very calm. Why? And I'll tell them a little bit about it. But basically, my human interaction, to use myself as an example, is that I realize that I very rarely contribute to conflict in the world. And this has been for a while. And that makes me feel pretty good. Because really, that was what I was after my whole life. I remember even being as a kid, as a teenager, wondering, why is my mind, why am I so conflicted? And why do I seem to create conflict where I go? Inadvertently. Because I didn't understand who I was. And I didn't understand other people either. It's such an important question. I hope I didn't go too long into it, but that really, we're getting to the essence of this, aren't we? Years and years ago, I think you've heard me talk about, most of you have heard me talk about Father Ken, and one of the things that he would say, or Brother Ken, he was a Jesuit brother, is life is a relational experience. And so it is at that point of contact with others that we get to experience our life. And hopefully it's a life that is grounded in concentration from our cushions, isn't it? But ultimately, the Dhamma plays out in our relations with other people in a practical way. This was true this is the the importance understanding of the Buddha's Dhamma. It ultimately takes us, Father Merton, one of the great Christian mystics who spent many years meditating on top of a mountain, 10 years. He came down off the mountain, and the first thing he said is, a well-concentrated mind, he uses different terms, is useless unless you can take it to the marketplace, meaning you have to take this understanding out into the world in some way, or it's completely useless. And that's true. So as we develop the Dhamma, we have to become familiar with interacting with the world from a place of wisdom rather than a place of ignorance of the way things are. That takes additional practice, doesn't it? And so I would say the conflict is coming up in your, that's the wrong word. The tension is there because you're just getting used to or getting familiar with interacting with the world from a different point of view. That makes sense, doesn't it?
I am.
I answered the question. Good
Yeah.
for me. Now, what a great discussion. Thank you, Lorna. Judy, so good to see you this morning. How are you?
Morning, John. Thank you.
Good.
Oh, yeah, and isn't that what it's all about?
Yes.
I mean, if everybody could do that, but as you were saying before, it's unrealistic to think that everybody in the world could awaken at the same time, but one by one, as we go out into the world
Yes.
with an understanding of who we really are, then that's all you can do. That's the best you can do,
Yeah.
right? That's what.
Yeah.
And whoever you meet, you meet. One time I was here in class and Matt was here and he talked a little bit about his practice or his work being his practice.
Yeah.
And I related to that and I thought,
Oh, yeah.
that's true too. And so I meet all kinds of people and you can't categorize them, but like you were saying, John, I mean, there are people that sometimes, and people like to talk about what's going on.
Yeah.
And I realize they're somewhere that I don't want to be, and so it's just my job. I just kind of, I'm an ear for them, and that's it. But then there are people that come in and they're obviously searching. They're lost, they're searching or whatever, and they do ask. And I always send them here. I always tell them about you.
Thank you.
And I'm coming here, and there's all in between, but this has helped me to develop. Unless somebody asks, I'm not, pushing.
Yeah.
Teachings. I'm not proselytizing myself or anything like that. I'm just, let people be who they are. But if people are looking, that's another thing, that you feel like, okay, well, here's an opportunity to maybe help them, maybe put them in a direction, that help them. So that, and I love that about my work. A lot of things I love about my work, but so you have to feel it out and know who's open, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe for something else and who's not, but you engage with them anyway, right?
Yeah.
For the moment, you don't have to be the best friend.
Yeah. That's right.
But I was on my way here. This is a conflict that I run into all the time, and I had the news on, and something came on that was particularly upsetting that was happening to someone, and I said, I can't listen to this, and I turned it off. And then I think, well, someone should listen to that. I feel like I should do something. And then I think, well, gee, you're not going to do something. You're not going to move to that country. And, yeah. So, but I feel guilty. I feel, with all the things that people suffer in the world, sometimes I just think I need to tune it out. I can't take any more of this. Keep myself where I want to be. But yeah, I have the moment of I should listen.
Yeah.
I should suffer. I mean, not like they are, but in my head.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with that.
Just what you did. Turn it off. Thank you, Judy. The the Buddha's declarative statement that dukkha occurs is reflected in that. Suffering occurs in the world. It's a consequence of living in the world. One of the earliest suttas the Buddha taught, and it was describing his view of the world just post his awakening, the Loka Sutta, he describes the world this way. The world is a flame. And it's still a flame 2,600 years later. Why? Because of ignorance. So the world is going to continue in that manner, whether you're listening to it or watching it or getting your Facebook feed, it's going to occur. And it doesn't mean we should live with our heads in the sand, but it also doesn't mean that we need to be 24/7 entangled in it. And so, again, a good example is an awakened human being and how he lived his life. The Buddha awakened in times that are remarkably similar to the way what's going on in the world today. There's just as much conflict then as there is now. Exactly the same. The competitiveness and aggressiveness was all the same. But he knew for himself to be effective in what he was doing, he couldn't live in the midst of it. Yet when it was appropriate, he was in the midst of it. Rulers and other folks would always be going to the Buddha, to his place of seclusion, and saying, what do I do? This is what's going on. And he would counsel them in the Dhamma. Another good example that comes to mind is, everybody knows who Mother Teresa was. She attended to the lowest of the low in Delhi, in that part of India, for many, many years. And I always had this idea of this remarkable saint that for 24/7, this is what she did. And that's often how she she was portrayed. But I read a biography about her once, and I was stunned, and it was so helpful to read this, that for 6 hours every day, her and her nuns in her care spent those 6 hours in prayer and meditation so that they were prepared to go out into the world. So if we really are concerned about others and the suffering in the world, it's okay to turn it off for a while and take refuge. Another, you were mentioning this too, another word for protecting ourselves, is taking refuge in the Dhamma. So it's just as an example, not that I'm the most perfect human being and everybody should act like me, but I never listen to the radio when I'm driving. Why? Because I'm driving. And that's enough for me, you know. There was a time in my life, many, many years ago now, but it was after the beginning of cable news, where whenever I was home or near a TV, the news was on. And I was constantly upset. And it took a while. I was addicted. I had to wean myself off of that constant. And so now what I do, and it's important for me as a human being, and important for me just in this little position that I have here, to understand what's going on in the world. But a couple hours a week is more than enough for me to catch up on what's occurring. In fact, I find that pretty harsh, but I get a pretty good. And I just, as an aside, the way I do that now is I look at two competing news channels, because they both have such extreme views, and that way I can kind of discern what's actually occurring out there. But it's very confusing. Again, I got off this subject a little bit, but
no, so it's like 10 to your roof.
Yeah,
right?
we don't,
And then you can,
and also understand that, and it took me. I remember when this thought kind of hit me, and it was, as I was developing my meditation and mindfulness practice, the world's going to get by just fine without me. And it just does, I think about the impact that I've had on the world prior to my teaching, and it was none. But I was a caring person. I was concerned. During the Vietnam War, I was old enough to engage in some marches. And there's an argument. I don't want to get into the argument, but I don't know that I did much good until I developed a measure of calm and peace in my own mind. And then I was able to bring that to the world. And the other way that I interact, we have this great system that a lot of people seem to want to break down. The most impactful thing I can do is go out and vote.
mm-hmm.
It's true. Mm-hmm. It may seem to many people that there's no impact there, but you're missing the point. So it's okay to turn the radio off. It's okay to take refuge in the Dhamma. Use the Buddha as an awakened human being as our guide. He didn't need to be 24/7. In fact, he spent most of his life in quiet seclusion and contemplation, but then continues to affect the world in a very positive way, to use that word, 2,600 years later. And I just want to touch on what you started with. Just people that don't know, Judy is an outstanding massage therapist right here in Frenchtown. And so the ability to bring that mindfulness to your table is really remarkable. And I've been on your table, so I know that you do that too. Yeah. Yeah. And that's how it works. That's the practical application when it's appropriate. Please say hello to Andrew.
I will.
Good morning, Lisa. How are you?
I'm fine, even though it may look like I'm not.
Is it healing?
Yes.
Good.
To answer everyone's question, I had skin cancer, but I don't anymore.
Good for you.
There's going to be a very, very long healing process.
Yeah.
And for a large part of the time, it will be very obvious to throughout the public. And so that's an interesting perspective, because I'm the kind of person that sort of usually wants to fade background, not really be noticed. And so that's something that I have to think about a lot right now. Accepted. It comes and goes, but it's a fact. If there's nothing I can change.
Yeah.
And I think I've been generally pretty okay with it, although there may be people.
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, well,
No, I didn't hear it.
Oh. But I think that meditation and coming here in the Sangha and just over a period of time has helped me a lot in being like it's not good or bad. And a lot of major things happened since we've last been here. And I try not to think of them as so-called good or bad. They just are. And yes, things can bring joy. Totally appropriate. Of course, you've said that over and over. We're people and we have feelings. But we can't put those feelings and the events in a box and say, that's the way it is.
Yeah. Right.
Time goes on. And I think that good things can happen out of anything, and sometimes bad things can happen out of good things. Because, people say this all the time. If such and such hadn't happened to me, and it would be a very, very negative thing, I never would have met so-and-so, or I never would have known about such and such. So anything that can happen can bring wonderful things into your life. And that's the way I'm trying to see it. And the restraint part of it is really, really good. Because it's not, trying not to have too many hissy fits about things. So that's it.
Thank you. What a great perspective you've developed, through the Dhamma, and to get through that. The recognizing that whatever's occurring this is not me, this is not mine, this is not who I am. It's just what's occurring. Depersonalizes everything, allows us to maintain a measure of calm and peace. Maybe occasionally we have a hissy fit too, and that's just part of it. Come back to what's occurring, and come back to your breath, come back to the Sangha, and continue. But you have that perspective, not taking it so personal anymore. So thank you. Glad you're here this morning. Kevin, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tom. This is really intense.
Is it?
Yes. So, I guess one part of this sutta that I think about is, Anathapindika, right? That's how I pronounce it, and his being able to continue in his livelihood, and it's right livelihood.
Yeah.
And livelihood came up with duty too. And I found recently that my livelihood is very intense. If anybody knows, I'm a pediatrician, so I think it's a right livelihood. But also, it causes a lot of conflict for me, and that can interfere with my concentration, can interfere with my grounding. Takes the roof off sometimes, I think. If I think I've made a decision that might adversely impact someone, it's very heavy. It's hard not to obsess about it. And then in most cases, or so far in my whole career, nothing bad has happened, but there have been many moments where that interferes, and it really makes it difficult to concentrate and to stay with my breath, and to even have the perspective that this is life as it's occurring. But I feel it might be maybe karma where I contribute to something that might have a bad outcome, and it's heavy. So sometimes I don't know where to put that. If that's anything that you can answer.
Well, and the perspective of the Dhamma, I guess, I could never claim to know that really awesome responsibility that you have as a doctor, especially in your specialized field. Like, that's the awesome responsibility is awesome to me. And dukkha occurs no matter what your best efforts might be. So, I happen to know you personally. I know you're a person of extremely high integrity, and that you are well focused on who's in front of you. And at the end of the day, and this is an aspect of dukkha, because I'm going to give you an unsatisfactory answer. Dukkha occurs. At the end of the day, it just might not be enough. That is unsatisfying, isn't it? And I'm sure it's unsatisfying to you. And that's so. Boy, you're right. This is heavy. but again, you're in a heavy situation, and look at the example. Excuse me, Lisa, for using you as an example. Medical science has gotten to the point where we can treat something like this, and apparently, I know there's a time frame, but it seems like it's successful. But then there is some things that there's nothing you can do. So as it relates to the Dhamma, the best advice is to keep it in that framework of the three marks of existence, and understand that things change, that you have no impact on, and to continue to be as ethical of a person, of a doctor as you are. And that's all you can do. And the Buddhist perspective, he taught many people that took to his Dhamma and awakened, but he also taught people that learned from, the great teacher that didn't take to it. His own cousin, Devadatta, continued his confused and deluded ways and tried to kill the Buddha twice, kill his cousin. And so I know that you've had this, you give people the best advice. This is what you should do. You should quit smoking. I'm telling this to kids, hopefully. But people keep smoking, It's how much you can do. Maintain that framework of the Eightfold Path. I hope that answer is helpful to you, Kevin. I'm glad you're here today. Eva, good to see you. Good morning.
Everyone to be here. I'm definitely at the right place at the time. It's very intense. And for me, what I'm feeling is I feel restraint has me pent up. I feel frustrated with trying to be skillful. And I just want to have a hissy fit and a tantrum to just let it out, but I keep trying to restrain myself from doing that. But you did say that sometimes we just should go there, just go off and do it. So I think I'm going to do that after here.
I'd like to see it. Where are you going to?
Thanks for waiting.
It's just like, I do feel like my feet have been knocked out from under me, and I'm always trying to, am I doing the right thing? Am I, stop thinking this, stop doing this. I'm so tired of trying to keep a tab on myself, and I just want to stop. But so I do, and I am very grateful to be here with everyone, because hearing that the Dhamma is helping us all to find our way. I know I'm on the right path. It's just that right now I just hit something that I just have to remain silent and try to let go, and all those things that I do have, I do know what I should do. It's just that I just rather have that hissy fit.
Thank you, Eva. Saying that we should always practice restraint at the sixth sense base, I should probably use the words gentle restraint, because when there's times that we miss it and become entangled in the world again, that's when we need to be gentle with ourselves and recognize this is why I'm on the path. It's not to be perfect, because that's being harsh with ourselves. That's judging ourselves. It's just to maintain the integrity of the Eightfold Path. And when we find that we've slipped off the path is just there to remind us to come back on it. It's not to be taken. And it's very hard for us, because all of us have been brought up in a society that says if we want to improve ourselves, first find out where you're wrong, give yourself 30 lashes, and then you might get, and it never works. Again, that aspect of gentle restraint, recognizing, and this is where the most gentlest thinker of all time gave us an Eightfold Path, so we could recognize when we're off the path and to gently come back onto it. And that's all we can do. So, if you go out onto the towpath today and scream and holler for a few minutes, nothing wrong with that. Wherever it might be. And even in as our life unfolds, if we find that we've done something that is hurtful towards others by an outburst, you recognize it. And when it's appropriate to say, I'm sorry, you say you're sorry. I mean, that's just human interaction. And then recognize that the ultimate hurt was towards ourselves. And so we'll deepen our concentration so it doesn't happen again. But never judge yourself harshly. It just doesn't, that's for all of us, including me. It just doesn't help. Thank you for being here and bringing that up. Jay, good to see you this morning. How are you?
Good to be here. Good to see everybody. And it's a hard situation to be at the bottom of the batting, to try and relate. First thing being the Sutta, the business of keeping a good roof over your head. I'm very preoccupied with that. I have more reindeer than probably anybody. Always have, the giant golf umbrella in the back of the car, and rubber shoes and all like that. So I'm very preoccupied with that on a regular basis. I'm, on the metaphorical basis, as you're saying. The other thing, I guess, is the whole business of us taking care of our part of the world, thereby setting eventually the rest of the world instead.
Maybe.
Well, hopefully, but if I might, here we have this giant brick wall with all these bricks, and here's this one brick, which is people like us who are trying to think and trying to stay out, and just trying to stay out of conflict. And then there's the rest of the blockheads. You know, there's that whole wall of people who don't know, don't care. You can affect them sometimes, I suppose, if you get lucky or somebody pays attention to the fact that, you know, you're not creating havoc in the world. I'm not optimistic about where we're headed because, like you say, 2,600 years, and people are still brutal. People are still, you know, violent towards each other. You can only take care of your, you know, the microcosm. The macro is real hard. So I feel, again, Lisa and I had some interesting things going on in the last month, and I think I've kind of done okay because I had a chance. We have 2 daughters, and both are in some degree of conflict all the time, or, you know, at sea, as you could say, don't have their lives together or whatever. And I'm hoping that they see by my example or Lisa's example a better way to be. But I'm very much a believer that take care of your own little part of the world. Like Voltaire and Candide at the end, he says, you know, tend your own garden. Don't go running around getting involved in other mischief. But that's what you can do, you know. And so that's what I've always tried to do. But as far as being perfected, you know, I ain't perfect. I guarantee. You know, I'm trying to improve myself by coming here and listening to what people have to say, listening to what you have to say. You do a good job, John. You know, you really love it. A lot of people, you deserve a pat on the back. I don't know if anybody ever gives you a kick in the pants, but you deserve a pat on the back because you affect a lot of people in a good way. And teach them a way. You know, it's one more person here and one more person there. That's that brick on the wall. That's people who are awakened or at least paying attention, let's say. Yeah. And, you know, so you've improved that ratio, even if it's a body or a person at a time. So good for you. Good on you.
Thank you for saying that. It's important for me to hear that, just so I know that I'm presenting these most important teachings in a way that's useful. So, and I do get a kick in the pants every now and then too, and that's good too. Not everybody wants to hear this the way that I present it. Okay, that was a good metaphor. That we're that brick in a big brick wall, and the rest of the bricks are what the Buddha said is dukkha. Dukkha occurs, you know. And if we're taking it too personal, then we feel the weight of all the bricks on top of us, don't we? But when we don't, we realize that the only thing we can do is to attend to what's occurring up here and how we're expressing what's occurring up here to other people. And we get to live very peaceful lives within the midst of chaos, and it's the same chaos that the Buddha described. The world is a flame. It always has been. When you're, I was mentioning this, was it you? No, I was mentioning to someone talking about my dog. My 230-year-old aunt down in Florida. She's pretty old. Wonderful, incredible woman. I won't tell her story, but we got to talking about dogs and this dog. Remember that one? Remember this one? And I talked about mine, and I was talking about Bodhi, and I said that you whatever dog you have at the present time, you feel is the best dog you ever had. You know, it's just the way it is. But I feel that way about Bodhi. I think he's foreign. It's just maybe a silly way to get to the point. Whatever pain we're suffering, whatever conflict is within our minds in the present moment, we think it's the worst that we've ever had. When the truth is, it's always here. Whatever the suffering is. When we're sick, we think we're always going to be sick. You know, I know if we have a little cold, we feel like we're going to feel that way forever. It's just not reality. Impermanence says everything will change, and it does change. And it's always going to change within a framework of ignorance on this human plane, because there's not enough people that aren't. And so that's going to happen. You know, it's just a consequence of living in the world. And when we can understand that, and the only way we can understand the conflict in the world is to understand the conflict within ourselves. And the Buddha gave us a direct path to do that. And then from that understanding, the natural human tendency towards compassion, towards, if I can use the word bodhisattvaism, can shine and be useful and we will no longer do harm, even rooted in sincere compassion, but lacking understanding. We can remain at peace. We can be at peace with less than peaceful states and peaceful mind states. It's remarkable. And it works. Lisa.
John, there seems to be something, this could be just going off in another direction and we don't have to, but it's just, there's something so fundamentally contradictory about the nature of life.
Mm. Yeah, there is.
There has to be conflict. Without conflict, there's no growth. Okay, so, and it's the basis of almost everything. You know how they say you learn so much more from the things that go wrong than you do from the things that go right. Because when things go wrong, you have to figure if you want to move forward in a positive way. You have to figure things out, and but it's, you know, that conflict without death, if you know, life and death are intertwined, and you know, conflict seems so fundamental. And that's why this is so important, because life is conflict. It's
Dukkha occurs.
It's everywhere.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but what a profound statement. And so dukkha will occur, conflict will occur. As a consequence of having a human life, we will be involved in conflict on some level. So then the logical or reasonable answer would be, what do we do when conflict arises? The best example of what to do, or the most effective thing to do, is what occurred to King Ashoka. And I've told this story many times, and I'll make it quick because it's gotten a little bit late. King Ashoka was the most bloodthirsty ruler we've ever seen. Worse than anybody we can think of, worse than Hitler, worse than Pol Pot, worse than anyone. He was intent on conquering all of India, and he did most of that. And every time he would conquer a neighboring town or a neighboring kingdom, he would cut off all the people's heads and stick them on a pike. That's where the phrase said, head on a pike. That's where it came from King Ashoka. He came across the Buddha's teaching 300 years after the Buddha's passing, developed the Eightfold Path, awakened, gained full human maturity, and never hurt another soul. In fact, it so transformed his mind full of conflict and what to do in conflict that 2,300 years ago, he started something that we can't come to grips with yet and wish we could: universal health care for everyone under his care. He went even further than that and started universal veterinarian care for all the animals in his kingdom. So conflict will be there. And because of the declarative statement that it will always be there, it seems that there's a paradox, but there's not. It's what to do with something that's always going to be there. Individual awakening, just like King Ashoka did, just like the Buddha did, just like he taught. There's nothing we can do about all the conflict in the world, and there likely will never be. And I use that phrase because it's unlikely that it will. But the only way to know or to affect it is to awaken, to take to the Dhamma and awaken. The rest of it we don't know. There's things that we know are certain. We know, based on what our brilliant physicists have come up with, that at some point all this is going to be gone. It's going to blow up. You know, however it's going to end. The whole physical universe will end, and it might be in the next moment. Bahia felt that way, you know, the Bahia Sutta. He insisted that the Buddha give him the Dhamma right now, because I don't know what the next moment's going to bring. The Buddha might be dead, or I might be dead. Give me the Dhamma right now. And finally, the Buddha relented and gave him a brief teaching. Bahia awakened. That's how we should take to the Dhamma, because we don't know what the next moment's going to bring. But we do know that as long as we're here with a mind that is rooted in ignorance of the way things truly are, we're going to create conflict in our own minds. But there's a way out. That's the Eightfold Path. So Thank you for bringing that up. What a great discussion, and I hope it wasn't ultimately too heavy. You know, but we are dealing with, and this is maybe where people say, "Oh, the Buddha was such a pessimist or so negative," but he taught via negativa. The uplifting teaching is that if we're willing to address conflict directly in our own minds, we can bring it to cessation and live joyfully in lasting peace and happiness. Realistically, too. So, thank you. Any other questions or comments before we finish? It's gotten a little bit late. We'll conclude as we always do with the Buddha's words on metta. The only announcement I have is our next retreat begins in 10 days, and there's still time to sign up if you're inclined. So again, find your relaxed, meditated posture, and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouth. And again, take a moment to become mindful of your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class this morning. Peace.